Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome out to this meeting of the Development Plan Panel. My name is Councillor John Garvani and I'll be chairing today's meeting. The meeting is being live streamed on the City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves? We'll start from my left.
Good afternoon, I'm Paul Bingham, Team Leader in Strategic Planning.
Councillor Paul Ray from Hudson Riverside Ward and the Chair of the South and West Plans Panel.
Councillor Raymond Jones from Horsforth, substituting for Councillor Heswood.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Garvin Farsley.
Good afternoon, Ian Mackay, Team Leader in Strategic Planning.
Good afternoon, Thomas Johnson, Senior Planner, Policy and Plans.
Councillor Andrew Carter, Carvely and Farsley Ward, substituting for Councillor Barry Anderson.
Afternoon, everybody. Councillor Alan Lamb, Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Penny Stables, Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Philippa Plumtree Valley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to panel today.
Good afternoon, my name is Martin Elliott. I'm Head of Strategic Planning for the City Council.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, can we move to the agenda? Clerk, can you run through the first 5 items, please?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So, agenda item number 1, we have no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item number 2, there are no items which would require the exclusion of the press and the public. Item number 3, we have no formal late items or supplementary information. Item number 4, can I ask members to declare any interest they may have? Take that as no, thank you. And item number 5 is apologies. So we have apologies from Councillor Lennox, Councillor Barry Anderson with Councillor Andrew Carter substituting, Councillor Hesselwood with Councillor Raymond Jones substituting, and I believe we're just waiting for Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Akhtar, Councillor Campbell and Councillor Pryor, and I'll note their apologies accordingly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we'll move to the minutes. They're on pages 7 to 12 in your agenda pack. Any matters arising on those minutes? No? Can I take it then that they're a correct record? Oh, David.
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Campbell's on his way. I've just been in a meeting with him, so he'll be here shortly. Apologies for any inconvenience.
Okay. Yeah. Take it then that they're a correct record. Thank you. Okay, item 7, Leeds Local Plan Update. That's pages 13 to 56 of your pack. Martin, are you leading on this?
Yep. I'll kick off. Thank you, Chair. So, quite a lengthy report for members today. The main purpose of this paper is to clarify the progression of the Leeds Local Plan and provide a bridging report between where we've been working for some time now and where we will be asking Development Plan Panel in their May meeting to approve the consultation material. So there's a few things in the report to go through. The first relates to the scope of the Leeds Local Plan. For some time now, Leeds has had 2 local plan updates in preparation. There's been a local plan update 1, which was Your City, Your Neighbourhood, Your Planet, focused in particular on the net zero agenda, placemaking and other elements. That plan had got to an advanced stage and was ready to be submitted to the Secretary of State for examination, but because of a change to national guidance through a written ministerial statement, that amended the soundness of the plan and the policies that had been prepared in terms of net zero buildings. So the Council had taken some time to consider the implications of this, including the written ministerial statement upon a change of government, but that written ministerial statement still remains in place. So effectively, there would need to be a further delay to that plan before it was submitted. Now, given that the other local plan, Leeds Local Plan 2042, was also progressing, the decision has now been taken that it's perfectly sensible and rational to combine both of those plans together. So the objectives that had previously been considered in Leeds Local Plan Update 1 are now considered as part of Leeds Local Plan, and because we don't have to differentiate between the two plans anymore, we're just calling that single plan Leeds Local Plan. That explanation is set out in paras 4 to 8 of your report. So the Leeds Local Plan in its entirety then, in paras 10 to 12 of your report, if I go to the next slide please, and the next one please. So is a whole plan review, and it aims to the development plan documents that the City Council has had in place for some time now, that together form a complete local plan, and that includes natural resources and waste plan and air valley area action plans and policies left over from the unitary development plan, as well as a site allocations plan and a core strategy. The Leeds Local Plan will review all of those policies into one document. Now, the aim of that one document, once merged, will be to be simpler, more accessible, so that plan users can access those policies in one place. And that will cover the period 2022 to 2042. And as the slide says, that will cover the amount and type of development that the city and the district needs over that 20-year period, where development should take place, the requirements that that development should meet in terms of quality, design, protection of the environment, for example, but also how that development interacts with the current built form of the City Council and the current environmental form of the district in terms of its historic and its natural assets. Next slide, please. So we've been working on the Leeds Local Plan since 2023 in terms of some of those issues, and 2024 we've developed the evidence base, and in pages 10 to 14 of your report you can see the detail around the progression of that, and that's involved evidence base. It's involved reporting to Development Plan Panel on key bits of evidence base, including the strategic housing market assessment. It's also included setting a methodology for assessing sites and assessing a housing target, and holding Development Plan Panel workshops where we've taken the views of members on board in terms of how policies should progress. Next slide, please. So if we're thinking about that root and branch review of the local plan and starting afresh with a new plan, it's good to ask ourselves, well, how do we arrive at a new vision? And as part of the consultation that is going to be carried out in the summer this year, so the next step will be to take the material to Executive Board in June and then public consultation in the summer. So as part of that consultation, we will be asking people, residents and developers, you know, what factors are important to you in terms of how we arrive at that vision for development in Leeds. And paras 16 through to 18 set out some of the factors that will be involved in looking at that vision. So para 16 sets out the current vision within the core strategy, and it's interesting to look at that vision to see how successful the plan has been against some of those ambitions which were set back in 2014. For example, to strengthen the position of Leeds as at the heart of the city region, to grow the city centre to be a successful destination, to establish Trinity and Victoria Gate and deliver a new city centre park, and to get a good sustainable balance between brownfield and greenfield land. Para 17 sets out some of the successes and some of the headlines of that plan, including consistently being one of the top 3 house builders in the country, with over 40,000 new homes being delivered across the district in that period, raising significant sums of community infrastructure levy, which have helped fund Leeds flood alleviation scheme, but also delivering key bits of infrastructure to support new developments, such as to the East Leeds extension and key employment hubs, such as at Kirkstall Forge and Thorpe Park. So the slide there shows what we'd also like to engage with consultees on about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of the plan, and it would be helpful if members had any views at today's meeting to provide those, and that's at para 19 of the report. The rest of the report, next slide please, then goes on to looking at a set of 35 draft objectives. So these objectives are really going to be around, well, what is it the plan at this early stage is seeking to achieve? And these are draft objectives, so the objectives themselves are subject to consultation and views. And I was going to just go through some of the key objectives. There are 35, but they broadly arrange into sort of three overall themes. The first is addressing the development needs of the district. That's the how much and what type question. Shaping the spatial strategy, which is around, well, where does that go and how does that development help act as an investor into local places and parts of the city that need it. And then the third one is around ensuring high quality places and development, which is about protecting the environment from unsustainable development, as well as bringing benefits such as biodiversity, environment, design through new development. Next one, please. And this slide just sets out, as I start talking through the objectives, how they're grouped under those headings. So the first objective, just to draw your attention to in page 17 of the report, is around identifying land for 82,000 homes to deliver 74,883 new homes, which is required to meet local housing needs across the district. Now, this is an objective I've started with because we know that this is an objective that leads to significant local interest in terms of how many homes and where they are located. And I wanted just to set out that the housing target of 74,883 is set nationally by government as part of a national methodology, which was made clear in the December release of the National Planning Policy Framework, which this group considered. The reason that the identification of land is for a higher number, 82,371, is because at this stage it's proposed that a 10% buffer be added to the housing target. We know from experience and from our monitoring of housing delivery that you need more land allocated and identified in order to deliver a lower target. And the government themselves recognise that because their target to achieve for the country as a whole per year is 300,000 homes, but they recognise that local authorities should be delivering more than 300,000 permissions and allocations in order to deliver that. The next objective is around affordable housing. It is to deliver significantly more affordable homes in all communities at a level of affordability that meets local needs. Now that's directly sourced from local evidence gathered through the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, which members have considered before. And that brings with it a range of challenges because we know that where most development is being delivered at the moment, which is in the city centre and the surrounding neighbourhoods of the city centre, that's where markets and land values still remain relatively low to not be able to sustain significant growth in affordable homes. So the plan will have to look at alternative ways to deliver more affordable housing if it's going to meet those raised targets within the housing market assessment. Objective 3 is related to mix. Again, that's an outcome from the housing market assessment evidence base, and that's about making sure that we meet the needs of older people, we meet the needs of homes for disabled people to make them more accessible, but also reflect on the real needs for student accommodation within the city and what type of accommodation that should be. The next objective to draw your attention to is objective 5 on page 22. That is around defining an updated greenbelt boundary. That will involve a thorough and comprehensive review of the Leeds greenbelt to ensure that it is meeting its purposes and to see whether its purposes have changed. And that will be measured against new government guidance on assessing greenbelts, which only came out at the end of February. So the outcome of that assessment won't be available for the consultation. The next objective is around the settlement network. There's been a significant amount of evidence gathered on access to services within the city through what members are familiar with in terms of a complete, compact and connected assessment, which looks at a sort of a heat map for the city based on how accessible services are within a 10-minute walk. That has helped us amend and update the settlement network for the city in some ways. So whilst the main urban area and the major settlements aren't proposed to change any, there will be some changes to the smaller settlements where it's proposed that settlements such as Bardsey and Poole in Wharfdale, which were previously identified as smaller settlements in the core strategy, don't actually meet the good accessibility required as a result of that complete compact and connected work. And conversely, it's proposed that Harewood does actually have some of those facilities to enable its elevation to a smaller settlement. Now, I will stress that this is all for consultation and for discussion with local people, because what we want to learn is well, how does that feel to a Harewood resident? How does that feel to a Poole and Bardsey resident? Is the evidence that we've gathered right? Does it make sense to them on the ground? The other objective is objective 7, is around delivering housing in the right places to maximise the benefits of investment and realise opportunities for positive local change. And this involves looking at sort of 4 main ways of distributing development across the city, starting at page 26 of your pack. And in short, those options are to really maximise on the brownfield land availability that we have within the city council, within the city boundary, including the results of an urban capacity study that we've carried out, which really explores any untapped brownfield land potential that we may have within the district. It also involves, if we're not looking at greenbelt release, what happens to what's called safeguarded land, which is land which was previously released from the greenbelt under the previous unitary development plan and has been identified for long-term development needs. So what might that strategy look like? Option 2 involves considering the needs for a new settlement within the district. There have been 3 proposed to us to the east of the district, and 1 that we know has been proposed to central government as part of its New Towns Commission task force. At the moment, the data suggests to us that we don't need a new settlement in terms of the numbers to be delivered to meet our housing targets, but also that a new settlement wouldn't necessarily give us the benefits of spreading development to where local people need it, particularly affordable housing. Option 3 would be a focus on transport corridors in page 29 of your pack, and that highlights the potential role that mass rapid transit, as it stretches from Leeds city centre to Bradford and from Leeds to Dewsbury, would offer in terms of providing highly accessible locations for increased densities of development along major transport routes. Option 4 would be around meeting local needs locally, and our housing market assessment, as I said, identifies that there are needs for new housing across all settlements of the district, particularly for affordable housing. And we have here in this option the illustration of the sites that have been submitted to the council through the call for sites that are being assessed for their sustainability and appropriateness for development. And it's that assessment which will also accompany this material when it goes out to consultation. I should say at this point that some members are having member-only briefing sessions to consider some of the detail of this plan, but because that detail hasn't yet been finalised, it's not appropriate to circulate it at this public meeting. So you will have maybe seen some more detail than they were providing today, but some of you haven't yet had your sessions. So finally, just to pick up on objectives 8, 9 and 10, that's about meeting sort of commercial and employment needs across the district, and there will be a need to identify some more office floor space as well as significantly more industrial and employment land as well. Just the other thing to point out under Objective 11, which is around securing a steady and adequate supply of minerals. The evidence is suggesting, and the Council's sort of emerging proposed approach is suggesting that slightly differing from what national guidance asks us to do, because the MPPF asks us to identify coal and shale gas, which is a national important mineral, and safeguard that. We are intending to consult on a policy that says we don't think that we should ever extract coal and shale gas from within the district. So therefore, we wouldn't safeguard those areas. So it would be, just to point that out to members, that's in page 34 of the report. The remaining objectives, of which there are still quite a few, relate to ensuring that we get an accessible and integrated transport system to support new development within the city, that we ensure that development is built in as low carbon a manner as possible, delivers green space, enhances existing green space, avoids flood risk, and promotes and enhances biodiversity within the district, and also ensures that we focus on previously developed land where possible, alongside increasing the density of development in some places, particularly in places like the city centre, and highly accessible locations. So there's quite a lot in there, and hopefully the headlines that I've pulled out enable you to engage with that. I also think it's really important that we focus in on the approach to consultation, and I'm going to pass over to Ian, who's going to say a couple of points on that, and then Thomas, who's going to start to illustrate the consultation material and the nature of the consultation material. So over to Ian.
Thanks, Martin. I would like to start really by saying a thank you to members of this panel and to members of the public who have given some really positive suggestions on how we should undertake the next stage of this consultation, and they've been incredibly helpful, so thank you for that. We're looking at doing a 10 to 12 week consultation after Executive Board in June, and a key aim will be to enable all communities to positively take part, whether that's online or in person. And a significant part of that will be using digital tools, and we will take you through how that's shaping up just in a minute. In terms of the more specific approach to engagement, we will be undertaking a series of drop-in events in every part of the district, awareness raising events in high footfall areas, targeted events with specific groups. So if there's any particular recommendations there, we'd be very interested on hearing about those, and piggybacking existing meetings. So for example, community meetings that are already taking place and neighbourhood planning meetings as well. As well as that, there will be quite a lot of online material like last time. This time round, we're looking at doing a how-to video. In other words, how can you take part in the consultation easily and most effectively. So I'm going to hand over to Thomas, who will take you through the commonplace aspects of the consultation.
Thank you. So what you can see on the screen now is what commonplace will look like. I just want to caveat that the content of this will change as we go through the preparation of this, so don't take it all at face value. It's just to give you an impression of it. So in our last consultation, we sought feedback on the consultation itself, so what worked well, what could be better, and we've really taken that on board when we've designed how this should look. So generally, people felt that the material was more engaging with our last consultation. We used more images, videos, colours, that sort of stuff. They liked the option to click through the consultation to get to the questions that they wanted to answer. And but they also thought that it was still a bit too long, a bit too jargon heavy, and just a bit wordy, so we've also taken that on board as well. So this is the landing page that you would see when you land on Commonplace, and this is just to introduce you to what the consultation is about. Then you have the options to see the timeline, latest news, and the team that's involved in this process. This is your introductory text about what this consultation is about. So this is the overall what the Leeds Local Plan consultation is. And then we've broken it down here into the key topics of the plan. So you can see all the topics that you will be aware of. And we're going to take you through transport and connectivity because that's a topic that I work on. So it's easy for me to be able to put it through Commonplace. So you would click on here, land on what this topic's about. Again, the images will change. This is just taken from our previous consultation. We'll make these look a lot better as well. Gives you a brief understanding of what the topic's about, and then you scroll down and you see the topic broken up into each of its subtopics, so you can really get to that particular issue that you care about. So, for example, if you were really concerned about how transport would look in new development, you would click on this, and it would take you through to the landing page. Again, images will change. So we've really tried to make this so that you can answer the questions without having to read all of the text around it. You've got the option to make it as simple or as complex as you want it to as a user. So you'd land on this page and see, well, what's this theme about? This is a bare bit of information about what this theme is about for you to answer the question. To understand more, you'll click on this drop-down menu and you'll get more text there. You can also close it. We use pictures to break up the text again. So just an example of other developments around the country that have sort of integrated transport into the developments better. What you told us last time, this image is used from our previous consultation. Again, that would change as that says Leeds Local Plan 2040, but also to remind people of what they might have commented on in the past. So again, that is that very simple information of what people told us last time about transport in our consultation. So this one was that people seem satisfied with our approach to addressing the issues. However, a major concern is that new development is the capacity of existing transport infrastructure. You would click this here to get more in-depth understanding of what people said. And it keeps going down further and further. So you can really see how we're trying to make it simpler for people to understand what we're proposing. When you get to the options of how you can answer the questions, it's a simple thing of clicking on smiley face, sad face of these questions, and then, do you think we've missed anything? And people can answer that how they want to. This will change depending on the topic. So some topics will propose different options and different solutions where people will be able to click on those different versions, but some of them we want to keep a bit more open for people to give us more suggestions. And then at the bottom here, so with transport, if you want to read our transport strategy, click here and it takes you to an external link. When you click on next, it will take you through to some basic demographic questions if this is the first time you've answered one of our topics. If you have already answered that, it takes you through to a page where it says, thank you for answering this question. If you want to answer any more, please click on either the option to take you back to the home page or all the other topics that we're proposing. So that's how that would look. And then go to the very top, trying to do this so it's how you would access it. So that's how we're going to propose the different topics that we've been working on. And then for the site proposals, this is in its very early stages. We've only been able to get access to it recently. So this will change. But it will take you to a new page where we're going to be proposing site assessment work that we've been doing, but also the option to propose new sites. And then again, this is just a very basic example of how that would look. So you would click on the area that you want to comment on. It will bring up a map of what the sites have been proposed. And then you'll be able to hover over these and click on them. I've only done one of the examples just so you can see that one. So you'd hover over it, click on go to website, and it would open up a new tab similar to what you've seen before, where it would show what the site is. Scroll down, there'd be a section showing how we've done that site assessment. And then this is an example of the different questions that could be asked. Again, this will change. So how do you feel about this site being proposed? Do you have any concerns about it? People can click as many options as they want to. They can add something else if they want to. And then they use this box to explain the answer that they've given, should they wish to do so. Same again for any suggestions for how the site could be improved. And then anything else to tell us about the site. And then finally, a PDF link to open up a separate document to take you through a much more rigorous explanation of how we've done that site assessment process. With all the stuff that's on Commonplace, it can be read with a screen reader, and all the images will have alternative text as well for those who need to use screen readers for that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. That was all I had, and thanks for your patience. Quite a lot to get through, but hopefully that was useful. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to butt in with a question first, if I may. Okay, sorry. On the consultation that you just took us through there, Thomas, what provision, if any, is there for people who haven't got accessibility to the internet?
We will be doing a number of drop-in events, targeted events, and the piggybacking type things as well. I think there will be paper copies available in libraries as well. And like last time, a number of people did phone us for assistance, and we helped them. We helped them that way. So I think we'll be using a broad range of different methods. But as great as the online tool is, we are absolutely not only relying on that.
Thanks for that. It looks good what you've shown us there, so I'm quite impressed with that. Paul and Penny.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just reflecting on the consultation website to begin with, just because it's the freshest in my mind. A couple of things that come to mind. Just following on from the question that's just asked, will the hubs, because if someone's going to go into a hub to be shown a basic idea, because actually there's potential once you've got this fully working, particularly with the sites on there, that's a huge amount of information. So will the hub staff get some training on how to help direct people to where they need to comment? Second, or to effectively know what to print off to comment, if that makes sense. Secondly, the website itself, we are an international city now. What is the provision for multilingual translation, or is there going to be any provision towards that? And the third question has completely now escaped me. What was the third question? I'll let you answer those first two ones, and I'll try and remember the third one.
Yes, thank you for those comments. I think that's a particularly important point, retraining of staff in the hubs, actually, and that has been an issue in the past, and we are looking at that, and we certainly will be doing something there. And in terms of languages, I mean, I actually had this conversation this morning with a colleague about how we can best approach that. We're looking at mobile phone technology and how that can best be used, but I don't think that is going to be the answer for everybody. So, but we need to also be mindful of cost as well. So it is something we're actively looking at, and thank you for raising that point.
A third question, which is actually probably maybe an answer to the second question, but also a challenge, is obviously AI. Obviously, this consultation is potentially going to have a significant impact on the future development of this city, and therefore it's particularly something that might be very vulnerable to gaming, particularly with AI-based form captures, etc. What conversations have been had with IDS and our colleagues around our cybersecurity about ensuring that the site isn't gamed by AI to basically fill it with feedback that actually is to the advantageous position of developers, shall we say, rather than necessarily the citizens of the city?
Again, that's something that we are aware of and looking at, and we will be speaking to IDS about those issues. I mean, it's one of those things, on the one hand, it's a great opportunity, but on the other hand, it's also a significant challenge as well.
I think just to add to that, Councillor Ray, in terms of handling consultation responses, it isn't a numbers game, it's the quality of those responses. So each of those responses that we receive will be read and understood and considered and replied to in a broad sense. So it's whether there are issues of soundness being raised, not necessarily whether there are numbers of people objecting or supporting something.
I can get Gemini to write me a 30-minute script for an entire video with scenes and details. You can get quality, very prescriptive answers now at a click of a button. So I appreciate your point, but the technology is rapidly advancing and there are commercial sensitivities to the allocations of some of these sites. Let us not pretend that there won't be some people that want to try the system, because actually this is going to help dictate the development of this city to 2040. We need to be consciously aware of this.
Thank you. Councillor Stables.
Thank you. My question is about, given that this is a very in-depth consultation in that there's lots of different parts to it that you can choose to click on and direct yourself to answer in different areas, and that many people are very pushed for time, will they be able to go back at another point and will it remember that they've already answered some and then go back into it?
Yeah, so when you go on Commonplace, you create a profile for yourself, so it's not having to go in and fill in that demographic data each time. So yeah, you can come back. You also have the option to sign up to updates as well, so you can get updates on when we are about to close the consultation, or we can send out updates to people saying if you want to answer any more, please return back to it. So yeah, you can come back to it any time that you want to.
Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just make a couple of comments about the consultation, and then I've got, if we can come back to the original narrative, if that's all right while we're on this. So the two things, right on the first slide, and there's lots of good stuff in there, but my concern is it's very much in council officer language rather than resident language. And also the fact the very first page, Leeds local plan, for lots of people in our administrative area of Leeds, if you ask them where they live, their first response is not Leeds. In my case, it would be I live in Wetherby, or in Collins, it would be I live in Otley or Garforth or Kippax. And I think we need to have a really clear and simple explanation about the administrative boundary and why we need to have a plan and why we need to allocate houses. And I think we're in, this strays slightly back into the original bit, I think there's only 3 of us at the table, I think, that have been elected members during this process before. And we're in a different place to previous times where we're not having an argument about numbers because we haven't got a choice. And I think that needs to be clear in the opening material, that the housing numbers have been picked for us this time, unlike previous times. But it's still better to have a plan-led approach and to set out what the alternative would look like if we didn't do all of this. We just need to use the language to make the whole process relevant to people's lives wherever they live in the city. And while lots of what you showed is impressive, I think the first page that people land on really simply and effectively needs to set out why this is for you if you live in Otley, Wetherby, Garforth, Calverley, and why it's important that we have a plan-led approach to development.
Just to follow on from that, Councillor Lamb, you have to remember the reading age of the average member of the public is amazingly low. So things do have to be put quite simply and straightforwardly. And I totally agree about the any use of jargon can throw people off. So you have to be careful of that. Councillor Carter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Without wishing to over-egg the pudding, I think this discussion on consultation is absolutely crucial. I don't want to be in a position where you come back with consultation results, and if you bother to drill down into how many people have actually responded out of the population, you find it's only a very, very small percentage who then, the majority say, when they suddenly realise what's going on, are highly critical, quite rightly highly critical, that they feel as though they've been disenfranchised, not consulted properly. And Councillor Lamb's right, there's only, I think, 3 of us councillors in this room who remember the current local plan and the difficulties the then Labour administration got into, finishing up in the High Court with sites being withdrawn and put in willy-nilly over a period of years. But the officers were here, and the two there have it stamped on their backs, I think, like Queen Mary had Calais. And you can't make the same mistakes again, gentlemen. You've got to make sure this consultation works and drills down to people who normally find themselves left out of the consultation, and other departments, not planning necessarily, who say whenever you ever talk about council consultation to them, say, oh, we all know about council consultation, decide what they're going to do, make it damn difficult for us to respond, then do it anyway. That's not a position you can be in, because politicians have a habit of suddenly changing their minds when the going gets tough and the heat starts to build up, and you'll be left with it, or rather we'll be left with it. We can't afford that to happen. And I want more reassurance about drilling down to make sure my constituents are all properly consulted, because I suspect there's going to be a fairly major kick-off. Now, the other point I wanted to make is, if you look at the well, most sides of the city actually, but I'll talk about my side really, the northwest. You will see that we border a number of council wards, 4 or 5 council wards in Leeds, border the city of Bradford. What consultation is taking place with neighbouring authorities about what their plans are? Because if you live on the border, their plans are almost as important as the ones in your own authority, because what you could end up with is just a horrible amorphous of development between cities or between local authorities. Not just, I'm not talking about Bradford here, there's even Calderdale and Kirklees. You've said nothing about what discussions are going on elsewhere, and we don't live in a vacuum, and we need to know this.
On that one. Thanks, Councillor Carter. So, in terms of the cross-border relationships, the planning system sets in place a legal test, and it's currently called the duty to cooperate, and that is something that an inspector will scrutinise. And when we take this plan through to an examination, it will be one of the things that we'll have to satisfy, and that involves working proactively and productively with our neighbouring authorities, particularly around places that have an impact not only within the Leeds district border but outside of it.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Carlill.
Sorry,
oh, sorry.
Come back on
yeah.
But that would suggest that we get to the public inquiry and leave ourselves wide open to an inspector saying, well, we haven't cooperated, have you? Because the residents are saying, we didn't know that this was going to be adjacent to us, just over the border. I think you need to strengthen that up.
So everything that goes to the Inspector, Councillor Carter, everything that goes into the submission has been developed over a period of time, from the very start of the process right the way through. So the consultation and consultation responses will have to be reported. Any concerns that local people are making around development on the border will then in turn have to be dealt with through the duty to cooperate process and considered. So as an example, we know that North Yorkshire Council is currently running an exercise around a call for sites, which has got a particular impact on the major settlements of Otley and Wetherby. So when we consult in the summer, we'll be reflecting those, because local people will be well aware of them, and we'll be clarifying our views in terms of the roles of Otley and Wetherby, our approach within our boundary to deliver, and also any potential impact that our neighbours might have on that.
Councillor Carlill.
Thank you. A couple of points. It's more on the items to go to consultation rather than the consultation itself, because I think they're quite important bits in the document. I think I would benefit from a bit more of a discussion around this 10% additional, I think, and what that guarantees us. I see the need to have a 5-year housing supply at all time, but that 10% is the point at which residents could come to us and say, well, why have we got 10% more than normal? Why do you have to allocate this site when it goes above the numbers? And I think we need to be very clear on exactly why that is, and all members have to agree that. Otherwise, we'll be left in various arguments of whether this site's needed or not, because it could be in the 10% above where we get, especially if we're looking at changing greenbelt boundaries. Some really positives in there in terms of things like 100% affordable allocations, and I think it'd be welcome to look at where they are. I guess then I come to the main point of the areas that are consulted on. So we've got number 1, which is called avoiding the greenbelt in the options. I'm not actually sure it is, because it looks at those sites that have been submitted, many of them by developers, many of them quite large sites. So I would call it opportunity supply rather than needs-based supply. And I've got a concern that when you look at that map, there are a number of communities with quite large allocations in them that have been submitted to that call for sites that then ends up warping the needs assessment that you've got. I'll come back to that point on a moment when we look at the other option. So that's my concern about point 1 that I think is suggested to go in to the consultation. It's suggested that we don't put that new settlement in. One of the main points I completely agree with is around the time on that. However, we do have 17 years left on this plan, and I think we could do quite a lot in 17 years. That's point 1 on that. But second point, we are going to have another plan after this, and if we keep pushing that new settlement out, we do need to work out if there's a new settlement now in order to fit the 2042 and onwards plan, or when we review this plan and end up doing a 2027 to 2047 or whenever that might be. So I'm really concerned if we're leaving that out the consultation entirely, as this suggests. The fourth one, meeting needs locally, that comes then to the first point. When I did a little sum in my head there of that 0.8% that's suggested, that's a very small amount of the overall plan. So the overall housing numbers in that meeting needs locally, to me, if I've understood it correctly, is a very small percentage of the plan. Whereas I think it would be much more appreciated by residents were we looking at, well, if every area took on X percent of extra houses, we've got there 0.8% of extra houses, but that meets next to none of the housing need. So it suggests to me that a lot of it, the weight is going to be carried by the city centre, which has been a success in previous years. Fine, but I think we need to then be clear that that's what we're doing. Or number 1 on those opportunity sites that developers have put forward, which are there because developers have put them forward, not because we've decided that this is a good place to put houses. I know that they're being assessed, but I think there's a point at which working out how much that area of the plan has to cover, I think the balance to me is somewhat out with what I would see there. It looks like a very small amount is being on a per community level, and a large amount is being on a per opportunity level, and I think there's more we could do around that. The very final point I've got, Chair, sorry, is around that complete, compact and connected communities approach. And I get that we're separating the settlement hierarchy. However, I think for many of us, the important thing is not where that settlement fits already, but the ones that are perhaps on the boundary, those that are perhaps too small to be designated as a large settlement, but a small amount of housing growth could provide those facilities that aren't there already. And I think that's the ones we're most keen on, not necessarily saying this community has everything it is needed for the existing residents, so we can give them 500 extra houses to put on there, but we can say this community is sadly lacking in transport or in education or in doctor surgeries or one of those points, but were they to have a few extra elements of growth in there or more industrial opportunities, then they may be able to meet that boundary. And they're the ones that matter more to me, rather than just saying we're continuing to throw houses at areas where we could end up leaving them with facilities that are oversubscribed and therefore not really there in the long term.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Carlisle. So just clarifying the material in here, it'll get a lot more detailed the next time you see it. The second point is the way it's presented is this is what the evidence is suggesting to us, and this is an emerging approach, but you tell us what you think. Yeah? So there's no firm decisions been taken on the evidence, and everything in this report will be consulted on as a reasonable alternative. So those maps, starting page 27, are there to engage responses from local residents and developers about what's good and bad about that. Just to clarify that option 1, there's nothing in that option 1 that suggests, or there shouldn't be anything in that option 1 that suggests a green belt release. It should be, the little dots are entirely around sites that we already have allocated in the main urban area or have planning permission and have been either removed from the green belt or whenever in the green belt anyway. And the slightly larger dots are potential opportunities from safeguarded land that's been taken out the green belt. They may look a bit bigger and they may sort of go into green belt, but they're not meant to. They're just meant to indicate that the spread of those opportunities isn't consistent across the district. In option 2, the new settlement hasn't been discounted. The new settlement isn't necessarily where our evidence takes us, and isn't necessarily where our objectives take us, because ultimately what we will have to do, and if I just take a step back, because it's probably going to be helpful to members to understand the sort of the process. In terms of housing delivery, we've assessed the needs for each area as a starting point for the potential for development based on the government methodology for the 0.8 greater than existing housing stock, which you rightly point out. We've then applied affordability to that as well and looked at what that looks like across each of the main settlements in the district and the villages and the smaller settlements, but also the main urban area and the city centre. We've then taken account of existing capacity within those areas, and there are kind of around 45,000 homes that are yet to be built that we can count towards our figure. What we'll then have to do, having consulted on our assessment of those sites and those opportunities against criteria which you've seen before at panel, which is set out in para 156. It's the indicators around relationship to settlements, heritage, air quality, contaminated land. Having made that assessment, we will then seek consultees' views on that assessment. The council's then left with decisions to be taken, which I think you quite clearly articulated and quite nicely articulated as, is it per community level or is it per opportunity level? But armed with all of the consultation responses, what local people feel about their sites, what developers are able to offer in terms of improving some of the scores on their sites, the council can then take that view as to what that distribution looks like. So those options and those maps are suggesting that the city centre will play a role in that because of the expanded city centre partnership that we have with government and those expectations that government have as part of that partnership to increase the number of homes in the city centre. But that's not to say that we should ignore the objective to deliver more affordable housing across the city and to meet local needs locally, including for the right type of housing. For example, accessible housing, older persons housing, bungalows, which we know local people in smaller settlements want. So the next stage, the stage between this consultation and when we start to draft the plan, will be really key to discussing those balances between opportunity and community that you talk about. But I'm absolutely sure that nothing's ruled out, or nothing should be ruled out within the material that we've got in front of us today. Is that okay?
Come back briefly, Chair, on this. I guess the point I'm pulling out is at point 55 in the report, which says at this stage it's proposed that the preferred approach to be consulted on should be a mix of options 1, 3 and 4, which then is giving a view. So it's going to take quite a lot of people to then say, actually, I think we should put all our eggs in the new settlements basket, for instance, to change that in the consultation. What we're going out with is an approach that already seeks to show that item is discounted and that we're on a mix of the three. I think what it doesn't necessarily go into, so that's one point on it. The second one is what it doesn't necessarily go into is that balance between the opportunity and the community, as you've noted there. I don't think that's a clear question in this or a clear point in this. That's not. I think that is almost an important enough question that you could ask that question on its own in a consultation to get an answer with. And I'm concerned that's not the answer you'll get to the questions that seem to be putting out. There is a lot of opportunity, but yes, as you say, that is not adequately spaced out. In some points, that's where we've been quite positive. There's loads of opportunity in the city centre, and we've been quite welcome to more living in the city centre. However, there will be odd sites here and there and anywhere that perhaps have opportunity but don't take the community element into heart at all. But similarly, 0.8%, as far as I've calculated, is a very small amount of the requirements for the plan. But we're not really asking people, what do you think should be the balance of these two things, as far as I can see clearly.
Well, that's really helpful, and we've got time. I mean, that's part of the reason for bringing this material now in its kind of early draft sort of form between now and when we go out to consultation, so we can take those points away and we can sharpen that up and bring that back to this group next time.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points in no particular order. You made a reference to significantly more affordable housing, and I think we all agree we need more affordable housing. But I just wonder about the comment, because we have a policy in relation to affordable housing, which we only rarely apply to planning applications. We almost never apply it in the city centre. So I suppose I'd ask the question, do we need more affordable housing, or do we just need to implement the policy? And the same is probably true with housing mix, because I know on more than one occasion I've sat in plan panel meetings where we've bemoaned the fact that the development doesn't meet the council's policy in relation to housing mix, but have agreed it anyway. So I think there has to be some sort of relationship between policy and implementation, as well as aspiration, for want of a better word. Going on to the, I agree with most of what Peter said, actually. I think we shouldn't, save me the bother of saying it all. But I don't think we should do away with the idea. Well, no, and I think you've touched on this, but the idea of a new settlement, I have to say, going back to, what would it be, 10 more years ago now, when we talked about the new settlement out at Wetherby, actually that would, had that come off, it would have solved a lot of problems. It didn't. There we are. So I don't know if there isn't another site somewhere in Leeds that might fulfil that function. And I think we ought to keep an open mind in relation to that. I suppose the other thing is, when does a small settlement become a large settlement? And you've touched on that, but I can recall from the consultations around the old plan, on more than one occasion, members of the public, encouraged by certain councillors who are no longer with us, were saying, actually, we shouldn't build accommodation within our small settlement, but rather we should build it in the next settlement, which is much larger and has all the facilities. I don't think that's a sensible way forward. Just quickly on consultation, I am keen that we're very clear at the beginning of any consultation exercise that we are constrained in that we have to do something, and we have to produce a plan, and we have to find space for these houses. That's not a discussion. What we're really talking about is where's the most appropriate place to put this development. And I think anything that, as far as possible, involves as many people to respond once they understand that initial point would be helpful. Now, I think whatever we do, and any consultation I've ever been involved in, there's always somebody who says, for one reason or another, it's a flawed consultation. And it invariably usually is because they didn't take note at the appropriate time, quite frankly. And had they listened when they were told and not waited until the bulldozer turns up, then they might have known more about it. So I think that's very important to try and make that happen. I appreciate that not everybody is computer literate. Usually at this point somebody says old people aren't. But I think actually old people are as computer literate as anybody because we've grown up with them, actually. But I think there is a percentage of the population who can't cope with computers, and they may be 20, they may be 40, they may be 60, they may be 80, and they need some support, which I hope the hubs will give them. And finally, I'll touch on consultation with neighbouring authorities. If I look at Otley and I look at the sites and I call for sites from Leeds within the Otley area, there are relatively few, I must admit, of options being put forward because there is a limited amount of space. But if I look at North Yorkshire and Bradford, they have in front of them currently proposals that would build approximately 700 houses across the boundary, just across the boundary from Otley. And I think it's very important that there is some coordination and that, well, from my point of view, they don't build them, but that this process that actually that's quite a good place to put them because they're handy for the Otley facilities, even though they're miles away from Harrogate in this case or the centre of Bradford. And I think that we need to make sure the Mayor understands our position on this, because the Mayor will have a regional function, and I think we need to ensure that Wyker and her are singing from the same song sheet as us, because I think if she picks out a strategic element, my understanding from having a chat with Mr. Feeney earlier on is actually if she makes a strategic case, then it would override what we might want to put forward as part of our plan.
Yeah, I can come back on the affordable housing element, Councillor Campbell. I think one thing we haven't discussed yet, and one thing that will need to be reflected through this plan, is an economic viability study, and viability is an important part of plan making, and as you know, it's an important part of decision taking. We need policies that can be implemented, and will be tested on whether those policies can be implemented. And we'll have to consider whether there is viability in the system to be able to deliver more affordable housing in places. The government suggests through the National Planning Policy Framework that one option for local authorities would be to make use of what they call grey belt. And if grey belt is released, then 50% of homes on that grey belt should be or could be affordable. Or at least significantly more than a local authority currently sets should be affordable. again, that's one option. But page 18 of the report does list along a number of other options that the plan's going to consult on in terms of how to boost the delivery of affordable housing.
Can I just come back on on affordability? And it is a constant source of frustration, I think, to plans panel members that developers come along with a viability estimate on a piece of property that we believe actually isn't quite as expensive to develop as they say. And I just wonder if there is a facility for us to back up our comments in relation to viability by actually coming forward with something that describes what's viable. Now, I'll use the example, and I use it every time, but I think it's important, of build-to-rent blocks of flats in the city centre. And the district value is constrained about how they come up with a value and a cost. And the constraint is they can take the building costs at the time, yeah, and then they have to balance that against any income that might come in. And the income is the rent on the flat, or the rent on the flats, fixed at a point when they were built. So you may well put the rent up over a 20-year period, but that cannot be taken into account. And the other thing that depresses me is the residual value of the property cannot be taken into account. And yet the developer is then entitled, it would appear, to a level of profit which is, for most small businesses, quite excessive. So if you were making, in your pub, if you were making 20%, well, you were making, well, if you were making 20%, you'd think that was quite reasonable. But a developer assumes that's what's going to happen.
Net.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. And I think until we can crack that issue, and I particularly regard the residual value of the property, because they do have a significant residual value. So it seems to me that we need to have some conversation about what we would regard as affordable.
So thanks for that, Councillor Campbell. So those conversations have been ongoing for a few months now. There have been some training sessions for scrutiny members as part of Councillor Bithel's infrastructure and investment scrutiny. There's also been some training sessions for plans panel members. I don't know whether you were at one of the recent training sessions on viability, where officers and members were updated in terms of the current macroeconomic position, the current approach to assessing viability, and some of the key impediments and reasons as to why viability was difficult, particularly in the city centre. But the other thing is that the government itself is indicating that it will revise its approach to assessing viability. So we'll need to keep a lookout for that and what that means. But there will be an economic viability report that will need to look at all of these objectives and in due course the policies that flow from them in the round to make sure that they can be delivered. And that delivery will look different across different parts of Leeds, because ultimately the land value and the market value of a house and development are two key inputs into that viability. But I do accept that there are other inputs which the council and its consultants and the district valuer need also to consider. So there is work underway to look at the approach that the council takes to viability, which will feed into both this plan but also development management decisions.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies in advance that while it's Councillor Carter that's subbing for Councillor Anderson, I've got a Barry-style list of questions and comments to go at. So settle in. If I can start with the new settlements idea, or last time round we called it strategic sites, and I think we all, those of us that were around at the time, have a shiver down our spine every time you mention those words, which is why we're now calling it a new settlement. I agree with Councillor Carlisle on this one, that which is terrifying for you that everyone is agreeing. And it won't come as a surprise, because we discussed this last night, Martin, although I have some additional reasons for those that were set out by Councillor Carlisle. So one, I think it is about future-proofing for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it would, if we went for a new settlement, it would only contribute a limited amount of housing to this plan period, but we have to think beyond that. For the reasons described, but also some of our major settlements in particular have got quite significant constraints around development, and as you'd expect, I'll pick on Wetherby, bounded by a river, a very constrained town centre, that if you're going to keep expanding and looking to the major settlements to do the heavy lifting in the plan and the city centre, there comes a point where, well, how are you going to get more shops and services into the district centres? Then you have to create a competing district centre, which is going to threaten the viability of what's already there. So a new settlement is there for that reason as well, why we should be considering it. And the final point is, it could happen anyway, because it's submitted in the government's court, and that's the biggest danger, that we get a new settlement. In that circumstance, it doesn't count towards our housing numbers. So given that risk, we should be, in my view, at the very least, this plan, putting it as an option, with the caveat that we should be singling out the south of Leeds site to link into mass transit, and that's the hook to bring it forward. It shouldn't be an open call for strategic sites in the city. So there's one identified, it's dependent on mass transit coming forward, unless or until there's a Public Works Act order to confirm mass transit, then yeah, it's more a safeguarded site, I guess. But I think we should be exploring that through the consultation as an option for quite a wide variety of reasons. The next thing to come on to then is the duty to cooperate. And again, Martin, this won't come as a surprise from last night in our discussions, that while Colin's concerned about 700 houses around Otley, I'm concerned about the several thousand houses proposed for outside Wetherby. And the problem with plan making is the world doesn't stop to wait for us to consult on our plan, produce a draft plan, go to an inspector, consult again, and then adopt it. Things are carrying on all of the time. And as you know, we have live applications coming forward to expand our settlements. And I think through this plan, at this point, we need to make a really clear and robust position statement that we will assess the need and meet the need for our settlements, and nobody else should be considering doing it. And we won't be looking to expand their settlements. That's always been the principle in this region, that everybody takes their own smoke. I completely understand North Yorkshire's position. They've been put in an invidious position that their housing target has gone with no planning or preparation from 1,050 or so a year to 4,022 a year, and they haven't, therefore, no land supply, and they're in a very vulnerable position. For that reason, we need to say the needs of our settlements are met. It's one thing consulting about it, but I think we need to set out a really, really robust position. Otherwise, we'll find that west of Leeds, north of Leeds, south of Leeds, east of Leeds, suddenly it's very difficult to distinguish where our district starts and ends. And we'll have lots of people looking to us for our services and resources, and the money that's raised in tax will be going to other authorities, and the money that's raised for infrastructure will be going to other authorities. Next one is just on the proposals to change the designation of some of the settlements. Before we go to consultation, can we just have a ward by ward quick review of them? Because again, as we flagged up last night, there are, I would suggest, a few errors. And I'd highlight one, say, comparing Bramham to Kippax, for example, simply doesn't doesn't make any sense. And I think I understand how they've got there, but it's just in error. And as soon as you put things like that in the consultation, you lose people's confidence, and they'll focus on that rather than actually responding to what we need. I think that'll do for now.
Thanks, Councillor Lamb. So the new settlement, I think it's probably down to some wording in here that says preferred option. I mean, I think it's useful to have a preferred option to indicate where the evidence has taken us, but that's not to preclude the need to actually get consultation comments and people's views on that. But we can think about that wording. But if Development Plan Panel feels that the wording is currently too strong and is likely to put people off from actually engaging in consulting, then we can definitely amend that. And I think we should explore, and this consultation intends to explore, a new settlement. We've had 3 submitted to us through the call for sites, one at Thorpe Arch, one at Parlington, and a new one that we haven't seen before between Great Preston and Kippax. All 3 of them have been assessed through our consistent site assessment. We've had a 4th, which we know about, which we think is which we know has been submitted into the government's task force. But we need to keep an eye on what that government task force says and reports. The issue will be, without getting too technical, we can't rely on mass rapid transit too much, because if it doesn't happen, then that will then sites that are allocated off the back of mass rapid transit would fall away. So we need to take our time, and we may need to update the plan within the plan period. I mean, it's unlikely that this plan will last 20 years without being updated. And actually, we need to commit to review the plan and update it if needed every 5 years. So it may be that there's something about thinking about mass transit, because I would think we wouldn't necessarily want to take a view on where a new settlement should be without understanding whether mass transit is successful as an infrastructure commitment. On the duty to cooperate, absolutely, it's conversations with North Yorkshire Council have been asked for and sought. We'll keep those conversations going, and it is really important that the problem that North Yorkshire Council has with its 5-year housing supply doesn't infect our plan making, and the trust that we want local people to put in us that we're making the right sustainable choices for the district. And in terms of the settlement network and amendments to it, that's in hand now. Off the back of last night's conversation, Caroline Harris is going to provide members with more detail about those shifts and ask for their views on the attributing different settlements to different levels of the settlement hierarchy.
Thank you for that. Just to come back on the new settlement, I think, just so my language is really clear, I don't think a new settlement can or should meet the needs of the current plan period, but I think we need to be really clear as an option, and I'm right with you that it should be linked to mass transit, but we can't also have a plan that ignores that we hope and expect mass transit will happen in this plan period. And I think that site option, whether we're promoting a specific one or not, it should be clearly linked to mass transit. If mass transit's going ahead, there would be, or do people think there would be, a need for a new settlement, which both supports the financial delivery of it, because that's one way that we could look at our local contribution through that new housing growth, and you're also not opening up the whole city willy-nilly for people to think, right, let's revisit what caused so many issues last time, because I certainly don't want to be encouraging that, but I think just getting the language right, if that can be worked on. But I get the sense there's a view that we shouldn't be going as far as we are in ruling that out.
Councillor Sables.
Thank you. Yes, I agree actually with all the comments that have been made so far. And equally, I'm extremely concerned, as we talked about last night, about the border of North Yorkshire and around Wetherby and the impact, the potential impact of thousands of houses on the infrastructure in Wetherby and road transport, which is already a big issue. I did want to, just in terms of the consultation, raise the point that we seem to be getting a lot of feedback. There seem to have been a lot of consultations that have either come out from Leeds or from Wyker in the last year. And quite often I hear it said, there's really no point in filling it in because it's a tick box exercise. And that's a real danger. And the reason that people feel it's a tick box exercise is because of the language that's used. And I'm not suggesting that that's the case in here, but it's just really a warning that we need to really make sure that we don't give that impression by the wording that's used, that people feel as if they're being led, led like sheep along a pathway to get to the conclusion that the council wants to get to. And certainly I completely understand. I have filled out consultations in the past where it does feel like that. And you kind of halfway through, you think there's just no point. I'm not able to put the comments that I want to make, and I'm just ticking the boxes because they're there. So I do think it's really important that we ensure that someone other than in the council actually goes through it, the consultation, just to check that they feel that it is completely that it's completely open in the way that it's phrased, so that whoever's filling it in feels like their voice is being heard, and there isn't a set outcome that they're just confirming by doing the consultation. The other point I wanted to make was that where we are, in Wetherby Ward there are 6 town and parish councils, and each of them has its own neighbourhood plan. And I just wanted to ask whether those are being taken into consideration in this placemaking. Because, are we considering those neighbourhood plans? Because they are actually the wishes of the local people in terms of where they want housing to be delivered. So it seems to me that in order to make it as democratic as possible and to ensure that local needs are met, that we do take those into consideration.
Thank you for those, Councillor Stables. Just in terms of the nature of the language in the consultation, I fully take the point that we need. This is the point at which we can engage with people and we can listen, and we can take on board local views. At the same time, plan making is a very evidence-led an objective approach, so it's appropriate for us to present the evidence that we've gathered to local people and direct them to what that evidence is saying. And I think it's perfectly appropriate for them to challenge that evidence or say, well, I've got alternative evidence or a different reasoning that I'd like to put forward. But it's often helpful to show what the objective evidence is saying, and I think this consultation needs to walk that balance carefully between showing what the objective evidence is and not actually suggesting that we've taken a view on that. And actually, in terms of which sites, there's been no view taken as to currently anything could come in and anything could go out, subject to the views of consultees. In terms of the distribution of housing, there are a number of options that will be put forward, which will be assessed through something called a sustainability appraisal, which will give local people and consultees the opportunity to engage with that and put forward their views. So I do take the point. I think it's a good point, but at the same time, it's really important that we show our evidence, because it's our evidence that an inspector will be testing the plan on when they come to assess it in public. In terms of the the town and parish councils and their neighbourhood plans. Ian might want to come in. He's our neighbourhood plan team leader. But one thing I would say is we are going to consult on a proposition that neighbourhood plans might like to take more control, certainly over smaller amounts of housing or very small settlements that maybe sit within the countryside or defined villages. So rather than the plan set housing allocations, whether neighbourhood plans wish to take on more of an indicative target to consider what type, where, and I don't know, Ian, whether you want to add to that answer.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think in some ways, there's two aspects to that. I mean, I've had quite a few conversations recently with neighbourhood planning groups, and we've been talking about the consultation in general terms on how they can actively, positively take part in that consultation. And the second part of it is, generally speaking, about a review of their neighbourhood plan. And the starting point there is, why do you want to review your neighbourhood plan? And those discussions are ongoing. The conversations that I've had so far have been positive in terms of the comment that Martin has just made in terms of how would you like to be involved in the development of sites, and these have been positive consultations. So there's still quite a few neighbourhood planning groups to go around. I've probably spoken to 4 of them in your area so far, so I'll report back to you on that separately.
I'm just considering what you said. I think that's very positive news, actually, and I'm just wondering if there's a way to ensure that residents know that that's going to be in the process, because they will be asked, as we go through the review stage, they'll be well, they've already been asked through consultation what their views are. So I'm just a bit concerned that they will see the process as unimportant and periphery to what's going on, and wonder what the point is of all that effort and time in terms of creating the neighbourhood plan. So I think it's really good what you've said. I think it's not about what's going to happen, it's actually about communication, and it's making sure that residents in those areas understand how the two work together, and that it isn't a waste of time, and it does have value in terms of reviewing the neighbourhood plan. But thank you.
Councillor Ray.
Yeah, thank you. And it sort of playing on a theme that other members have brought up around, I suppose, how the consultation is going to be communicated. I'm acutely aware, and apologise for speaking on behalf of ward members that cover city centres in that sense, that we're going to take the whack, hopefully, of the development in the city to a certain extent. That's hopefully the plan, to ease the pressure elsewhere. And I'm very conscious that where we've got established communities and neighbourhood plans, there's a certain level of engagement within the planning process, and there are people to go to consult. The communities around the periphery of the city centre, the donut as I always like to call them, that at the moment many of them are actually bordered by city centre, in motorway, industrial land, and then residential. Those new neighbourhoods we're talking about actually seem very far away from them, but all of a sudden will become very, very close. And they're also some of the most removed people from our engagement process due to language barriers or average reading age, or them just not seeing it as an important thing, because actually a lot of them live in very established communities, so why would anyone want to start building stuff towards them all of a sudden? So in terms, I suppose the question I'm going to ask is, bearing in mind there is going to be significantly limited resources, there always are with these things, there is obviously going to be a reliance as a base on online with some engagement with hubs and etc. What is the thinking around how, if you will, the effort is directed to those communities that are actually going to see probably by far the most significant amount of change and the significant amount of pressure on their services? Because I think we're all aware, we've talked about the services in some of the smaller communities. Actually, if all of a sudden you have around the periphery of the city centre 17,000 properties pop up all of a sudden, There is going to be a lag until those primary schools come. I know we've got an issue in the short term with primary schools, but there's going to be an issue of a lag around primary schools, healthcare, green space provision, and so actually the buildings will go up a lot sooner than those services, and then that will have an impact on already very established communities that are already very strained. And I'm not sure they're going to realise how important this is to them and how to engage with what is going to be a fundamentally game shifter as the city centre potentially doubles in size and suddenly turns up on their doorstep.
Ian might want to come in, but this is something that we've recognised, Councillor Ray. It's something that, as part of the transformational regeneration project we're talking about, the best ways to engage, and it's also something that I think needs to be put in terms of what does the investment in the city centre mean for you? How can it improve your neighbourhood, your locality, both in terms of access to services, access to the city centre, jobs, and access to green space. So we're definitely thinking about it. Ian engages with already a variety of different groups that sit around the city centre, and we know of some already. But where you aren't in a group, it is difficult. So I think what we will do, and we can talk about this when we have the specific ward member session on the city centre, because that was part of our ambition to do it at that session. But I don't know whether, Ian, whether there's anything you want to add.
I think in the past year or so, I mean, we've undertaken engagement in places like Holbeck, Mabgate, Lincoln Green, Burmantoffs, Hare Hills, and some things have worked, some things haven't worked. And one of the really good things about that is that we know limited resources, we pretty much know what will probably work in terms of that previous experience. Now, on the really positive front, we have a small budget for doing some targeted work in those inner city and surrounding communities, and we're working our way through the best approach to that. So any particular suggestions on how we do that would be very welcome. But I think, as I say, from the experience that we've got a reasonable good idea of what will work. And the starting point is, of course, raising awareness, but the second point is really having that face-to-face engagement in those areas. I think that is critical.
Okay, I've got Councillor Ray to come back since he's on a follow-up, and then Councillor Lamb, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Yeah, I think it's just a couple of comments. I mean, the last couple of kind of consultations we've done, I think about the highways ones, for example, as a city. I looked at the map and the dots, and basically no one from Hunslet commented on anything. A few people from Beeston, and yet actually they were some of the most fundamentally impacted by the changes to the road network and the entire system, because it was their main artery into the city. So I do appreciate the point that you've realised there is a gap there. My concern is we've talked about we're engaging with groups. I will imagine most of those groups are regular stakeholder groups, probably from the business community, probably from the developer community, people like Leeds Civic Trust, and not the person that goes to the coffee morning at the community centre where I'm the chair of trustees. And actually, if we're talking about that face-to-face engagement with some of those communities that are some of the most disadvantaged, but are going to face the single biggest footprint change to where they live, there needs to be some very serious thought about this. And it's not just a case of having a couple of face-to-face, because you've got to communicate how you're having a face-to-face meeting. You're going to have to do it in places. My community, and I'm sure this is true for the other city centre communities, are massively disrupted by major roadwork networks. You can have a residents' meet on one side of the road, and on the other side of the road, they won't go it because it's across the main road. And so I think there needs to be some real proper thought on this. And it's not just about conversations with, let's say, communities from the global majority. These are about some of our working class communities that don't engage with the council. And I think we do need to have a sit down and proper chat about this with the city centre councillors who cover most of the inner city ward areas that are going to be impacted by the city centre, and have a real detailed conversation. Not just a case of we're going to try a few things. This needs to be thought about. These are going to be some of the most infected communities in the entire city by the plan, because they're taking the lion's share of the development.
Okay, Salam.
Yeah, thank you. Just casting my mind back to 2011 to try and help Councillor Ray a little bit, because we in the Outer North East were at the forefront of neighbourhood planning and the localism agenda, and you're right to a degree that probably have people who are more inclined to be engaged and aware of what's going on. However, we really had to force the issue in our patch, and we employed a localism officer from our it seems like what the right word is, but it seemed like we were awash with money in community committees in those days compared to now. We couldn't do it again this time round, but I don't know if you know that Holbeck shares an award with Walton in my ward for its neighbourhood plan, and there's potentially a role for engagement again across communities across the district, because it's not what you just described about working class communities in your area. It's the same across the city, and it comes back to my original point about language and tone, and not addressing people in officer speak and jargon, but actually making it relevant to the whole city and to people where they live. And I think that's the critical bit, because this probably is the piece of work we do that will have the single biggest impact on people's lives across the district for the next 20, 30 years plus. And getting it in simple language to understand the ramifications of this is huge. If people get that, they'll want to take part in it, as long as they feel their voice will be heard and listened to, and will help to shape things.
Thank you very much for that. Before we move on, I'm going to make a suggestion that if Thomas and Ian can organise a workshop for us during April, and rather than the next time we see this being probably a bit too late because they'll be finalised. Is that possible, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay, so we'll organise something for in April for a workshop to go through in detail the questionnaire. Everybody's happy with that? Yeah, go on, Alan.
Yeah, so I just wondered, before we do recommendations, are we going to resolve anything around the potential new settlement and linking that to mass transit? Don't have specific wording, but just to say that is going to be taken up.
I'm happy to agree that, Councillor Lamb, and take that up in terms of moving this material forward, definitely.
Everybody happy with that one? Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you, Paul, for sitting patiently. Item 8, Leeds Local Plan Authority Monitoring Report, which is pages 57 to 248. I guess we won't be going through this page by page. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. So this item relates to the Authority Monitoring Report for 2023-24. And the purpose of the Authority Monitoring Report, I'll call it AMR from now on, is to report on the performance of specific planning policies against the monitoring framework set out in the local plan, to summarise progress on the local plan against milestones set out in the local development scheme, and to provide up-to-date information on the implementation of neighbourhood plans. So the Council is required to make the information in the AMR available publicly as a legal requirement under planning regulations. The reporting period for this AMR, it runs from the 1st of April 2023 to the 31st of March 2024. For this version of it, you saw a version, you saw last year's was brought to the panel in July, but for this version we've also introduced an executive summary, and that provides a more accessible format for the document, focusing on the main headline information, and that's set out in Appendix 1 of this report. The full AMR document set out in Appendix 2, and that continues to provide all the relevant commentary, data, tables and graphs for users that require specific information. So that's why it becomes a long report, to provide all that information that can be referred to in planning evidence and for people to be able to access that information. The report's split into 12 main sections, including the section covering information on the preparation of planning documents and neighbourhood plans, and 11 topic-based sections which report on performance against the monitoring indicators. In the local plan and other relevant indicators, broken down further by subsequent subtopics. The data is presented for the 2023-24 period, but wherever possible, we've provided longer term data to assess performance, again, looking at the long and short term, especially given that delivery for things like housing and employment can vary significantly from one year to another, so it provides that wider context. A RAG, red, amber, green scoring systems used to present a clear indication of performance against each of those subtopics. Members should note there's an inevitable time lag between the end of the reporting period and the publication of the information in the document. That period is used to collect and collate data such as housing and economic development, planning approvals and completions. The AMR also makes use of data and information published by other bodies such as the government, and the publication of that information can lag up to 6 to 9 months from the end of the reporting period. In terms of the report, it provides a summary of the key headline topics, key headlines by topic area, and that's in paras 9 to 34 of the report. Some of the broad headlines are picked up in the report, so just to go through a few of those. Housing delivery in the period was 4,441 net new homes, so that's the highest, to put that in context, the highest annual delivery since we've been monitoring, that's since 1980, and it exceeded the planned target by over 1,000 units, led by delivery, particularly strong delivery in the city centre. Affordable housing delivery was at the highest level in this plan period, with 665 affordable housing completions. Carbon emissions across Leeds decreased slightly, decreased by 7% again last year, and are down 47% from the original baseline we have dating from 2005. And renewable installations of capacity and generation all increased in the reporting year, and renewable energy capacity does now exceed the target set out in the local plan. So just in terms of the report recommendation, members have been asked to note and comment on the contents of the report, and that will be prior to the AMR being finalised, approved by the Chief Planning Officer and then published on the Council's website. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions or comments? Councillor Lamb?
Yes, couple of questions. On the indicators around traveller sites, it's ranked as red for the short term, but green for the long term. And I'm trying to see on what basis we suddenly get from having a problem to not having a problem. And the second point was around the performance on conservation area appraisals and what the plan is to deal with that backlog. And should we be concerned that if we don't have a plan for that, it's going to start causing us issues with inappropriate development in conservation areas if we don't have up-to-date appraisals?
I'll take the second question first, if that's okay. There simply isn't the resource within the City Council at the moment, given the current issues around the Council's financial situation, to provide sufficient officers to carry out the conservation area appraisal updates that we now need doing. So they are prioritised, and they're being prioritised. We've recently carried out Mabgate and one in Morley, and they're being prioritised around where the development is likely to occur. And they'll continue to be prioritised in that way, using the officer resource available to us. But until we're in a position of being able to secure more resource for the council, we won't be able to get through them at the pace, certainly, that we'd like to be able to. But there are... The lack of a conservation area appraisal doesn't necessarily mean the council's totally vulnerable to speculative applications, because those applications can be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and other parts of the heritage offer, such as the recent online non-designated heritage asset log, which enables local people to engage and suggest non-designated heritage assets within their area, is one way in which we can keep updating the evidence that we have.
Sorry, on the gypsy and traveller question, I'll look into the specific how we've rag rated it, because it's inconsistent with what it says in the text. So the text said it would be red for the short term and amber for the longer term. And I think in terms of the red, it's looking at the current year supply position, which is 2.3 years worth of supply. So it's assessing it against that. It's obviously below the expectations that you'd have a 5-year supply. In the amber, over the longer term, it's reflecting there has been some provision over the plan period, but it's still below the requirements set out in the plan. I think there's an error there in terms of it being green, so we'll amend that for the version that gets published. But I think that's why there's a difference between the two periods.
Yes, it's maybe a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Really informative, loads of information here, historic. But presumably you use it when you're preparing the local plan. So given that most of these statistics would only be current up to the middle of last year, how then do you adapt the local plan to seismic changes like the economy going into recession, for example, the inability of people to access work? At what stage do you update this second paper to feed in to the first paper? That's what interests me, because I think we're in a very fluid situation, and I just want to understand the ability to adapt to those changing circumstances, because, boy, believe me, they are changing.
I'll come in first, and then if you want to come in, Martin. I think some of the data in there we can collect relatively quickly. So we're looking to do a very quick update on housing delivery, economic development delivery, so we can update it. So when we go out to consult, we've got the data for 24, 25. Other data in here takes a bit longer, so that's why the report takes a while to compile and put together. But some of the data you've got available to you in, closer to the end of the year that it's looking at. So certainly housing delivery, we're going to look at having an up-to-date position to consult on, an economic development delivery. Other things in here do inevitably take longer to get the information.
I think just to say that this is a key input into local plan making and policy making, because planning used to be described as you plan, you monitor and you manage. Yeah? And this is the monitoring bit in the middle. So how successful have our policies been? What does this report tell us about the success or otherwise? And therefore, how might we need to change the way we implement the policy or the policy itself? So it does that, but it does that alongside other bits of information and evidence. So I mentioned earlier the housing market assessment. There's a very in-depth employment land assessment as well, which will feed into the local plan. But it is a characteristic of the planning system now, that we have to write policies that anticipate that flexibility. So you're not necessarily going to get a straight trajectory for the next 20 years. And we do know that things that happen in the world affect the development industry, which have an impact on the achievement of our targets, which is why in the current plan there's wording around macroeconomic crises and how that shouldn't necessarily be, you know, our failure or our policies' failure. And so it would be important, I think, to reflect some of those wider shocks that you mentioned in terms of what impact that might have on the city. But just to finish that point, in order to deal with some of those wider shocks, it's really important both for employment delivery and for housing delivery to have a wide portfolio of site opportunities, so the plan doesn't put all its eggs in one development basket. Thank you.
You want to come back on that at all, Councillor Carter? No, thank you. Anybody else on this? Councillor Stables.
It was just about air quality, actually. So I can see on air quality management that there's six areas. Yeah, 6 areas that are monitored currently. I'm just wondering, as this feeds into the local plan development, should there not be more sites that are considered? So I'm thinking about Wetherby, for example, and the importance of measuring this, because as we build more houses, it's generating, not everywhere, but certainly in the outer areas, it's generating more traffic because we don't have the public transport network in the outer areas. So there is clearly an impact, and there is a correlation between more traffic, more cars on the road, and worse air pollution. So I would suggest it's very likely that in Wetherby itself, that air quality is reducing over time and will continue to do so as we get more houses. And I'm concerned that it's not being measured and picked up anywhere.
Yes, so I think the data in here is reliant on where there's existing monitoring stations, so it's picking up on those. There are 6 air quality management areas where there's particular issues identified, and I think 5 of those got revoked last summer because the air quality had reached a standard that it no longer qualified as a management area. But I think there's other monitoring stations on main roads. I'm not sure about Wetherby, and you're probably right that there aren't any, as far as I know. So there won't be any reporting stations that we've got data for here. But it's perhaps something that needs to be picked up with transport colleagues, that there needs to be a wider range of stations across the city, so you've got that baseline data that you can measure against, as you've described, where there's concerns about the impacts of development and the impacts that then that subsequently might have on air quality. But in terms of reporting, it's not something we had access to in terms of data, and it comes from the transport colleagues' sort of monitoring stations that they've set up across the city.
Press the right button, that helps. Is this something that could be picked up, as in because it potentially impacts the local plan? Is that something that you could follow up with transport, please? Thank you.
Yeah, in the previous paper, paras 152 and 153, that's objective 34 on page 48 sets out an objective around unacceptable effects on health, amenity and the natural environment, taking account of existing sources of air pollution. So that will be an objective that will stimulate the preparation of new policies in this area. And air pollution will be one of the assessments that we take in terms of looking at the tolerance of areas to new development. And in due course, when we're looking at the implications of chosen sites, long way down the line now, we'll need to look at the impact on road traffic, and part of that will then give us a much better understanding of any likely air pollution impacts and whether they're tolerable or not.
Councillor Ray.
It was just very quickly, because I know colleagues in climate and environment have been doing work with Leeds Beckett University on monitoring stations across the city, and they're running a network of them. and I know I've had conversations with Leeds Beckett about additional sites where there may be of interest so they can compare data, so that might just be an avenue via our colleagues in the climate team to see if there's anything to scope with the project that Leeds Beckett University has been doing.
Anybody else on this? Okay, I think that's covered it. Thank you very much for that, Paul. Okay, if there's no other comments, we'll move on to item 9, date and time of the next meeting. Next meeting of the board will be 13th of May 2025 at 1:30 p.m. As I said earlier, we'll look at organising a workshop during April for detailed questionnaire. Dropped you in it, Thomas, as you'd taken a break. So, see you sometime in April.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.